Right, good afternoon, everybody. I have, as you can tell, decided to go full festive spirit with my hat, my Christmas tree. So we have an appropriately festive kind of sack full of data goodies for you this morning. This afternoon, sorry, getting completely confused. So really delighted to be joined this afternoon by ONS, OHID and NHS Digital. I'm Hazel Cheeseman. I'm Deputy Chief Executive at Action on Smoking and Health. And myself and my colleague Laura will talk at the end of this webinar about some of the resources that ASH has. But most importantly today, we're going to hear from our government partners about the various different data sources that are out there to support the work that we're all doing. So really pleased that David will be speaking first from ONS, looking at the most recent data to come out from ONS on smoking prevalence and talk us through the approach that they have been taking so that we can have a timeline on smoking prevalence from the APS survey. And then we'll be hearing from Mark on the local tobacco profiles, which hopefully many of you are familiar with. And Mark can update us on where we're at with the local tobacco profiles. And then really pleased that NHS Digital have been able to join us, and we will have a look at the data that we have around young people in the smoking, drinking, drug use survey. And then finally, myself and Laura, and hopefully leave time for the Q&A. Although I think if you are unable to think of lots of questions for the Q&A, then the panel will be forced to sing some kind of Christmas carol. So I do urge you to add lots of questions into the chat. So the meeting will be recorded. We will circulate the recording at the after the event, and the slides as where the presenters are happy for the slides to be circulated. We ask everybody to keep themselves muted unless they are presenting, and please do add your reflections, your questions, so that we can have a lively Q&A session at the end, and limit the need for me to sing "We Wish You a Merry Christmas." So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker, which is David Mais from ONS, and David's going to be talking us through the most recent data on smoking.
Thanks very much, Hazel, and yeah, thanks for having me along to speak today. So just as a bit of an introduction, I'm David Mais. I head up the lifestyle and risk factors analysis team, which sits in the data and analysis for health and social care division within ONS. We produce all of the ONS statistics on smoking. And if you just move to the next slide, this is just a bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So as Hazel said, we've published our most up-to-date estimates on smoking prevalence last week. The idea behind my session today is to talk to you about a methodology change that we've had to make to our statistics, as well as running through the headline figures from the publication last week. So moving to the next slide, this just gives a bit of background about what information the ONS collects on smoking. So we have two data sources that we use on smoking. We've got the annual population survey. This gives us our headline indicators on smoking prevalence. It covers adults aged 18 years and over, and it's at the UK level. We also get breakdowns for each nation in the UK as well, and we use the APS to monitor against the tobacco control plan for England. We also have the opinions and lifestyle survey. This collects more detailed information on smoking habits. So we collect information on intention to quit smoking among smokers. We also collect information on e-cigarette use through this survey. And the OPN covers those aged 16 years and over, and it's Great Britain rather than UK. So just moving on to the next slide, I mentioned a bit about a methods adjustment we've had to make for the latest figures. To give you a bit of background on that, basically the pandemic had an impact on the way in which we collect data from the APS. So basically with the pandemic, the APS switched from being a mixed mode survey, so face-to-face and telephone, to being telephone only from the end of March 2020. And what we actually found is that when we analysed the 2020 figures, we saw a very large drop in smoking prevalence, which was unrealistic. And this was backed by research which basically shows that respondents will underestimate their smoking behaviour in telephone-only surveys. So basically, what this introduced was a break in the time series for the APS because of this mode change. And it basically meant we needed some kind of method to adjust for this discontinuity. And then this is basically what we came up with. So what we did, we have a methodology team within ONS. We went to them to get them to help us to come up with a methodology basically to adjust our time series for the discontinuity. And what we did, so the APS estimates for smoking prevalence, they go back to 2011. So we used our time series from 2011 to 2021 to calculate a year-on-year trend, which was done using a 3-year moving average at the national level. And from this 3-year moving average, we calculated a scaling factor, which you can see in the slide. And basically this scaling factor reduces the discontinuity effect in the data. And the scaling factor is basically applied to our survey weights to adjust the survey weight for the discontinuity. The discontinuity, as I said, occurred in 2020. So it affects the 2020 and 2021 estimates. So basically, we applied the scaling factor to the weights for those years, and essentially what the method gives us is an estimate for what smoking prevalence would have been in 2020 and 2021 had the mode change not occurred and we'd continued to collect APS data in the way in which it was done before the pandemic. And our figures now for 2020 and 2021 are now comparable to previous years because of the adjustment methodology that we've used. And this slide just shows you the effect. Sorry, yeah, that one, that's the one. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, this slide basically shows the effect of the adjustment. So the dashed line is the 2020 and 2021 figures before we make the adjustment. So you can see there's quite a large fall in smoking prevalence. And as I said, we decided this was unrealistic and because of the mode change. And then you can see the effect of our discontinuity adjustment with the smoking prevalence estimates for 2020 and 2021 increasing in the blue line. And in terms of what effect that has on the 2021 figures, our adjusted estimate was 13.3%. Before the adjustment, it would have been 12%. So yeah, there's around a 1% shift in the figures from our adjustment for 2021. And then just moving on to the next slide. So that's kind of covering the methodology issues we've had and the adjustment we've made. I just want to briefly talk through the key findings for the survey and the figures we published last week. So the headline figure for the UK was 13.3% of adults in the UK were smoking in 2021, which equates to about 6.6 million people. We found that out of all the UK countries, smoking prevalence was highest in Scotland at about 14.8%. And we put out our quote with our figures last week as well, which you can see in the slide. And yeah, this is a record low for smoking, which is good news. And we put some information in the bulletin as well about the use of e-cigarette devices and vaping, which we think has helped contribute to the decline in smoking prevalence over time. And moving to the next slide, this is some information from the Opinions and Lifestyle Survey, which, as I mentioned, covers Great Britain. And we found that there has been an increase in e-cigarette use between the latest years. So in 2021, just under 5% of survey respondents reported that they were currently daily users of an e-cigarette, which is up from 2020, although this is not statistically significant. And a further 2.8% reported using an e-cigarette occasionally, which is fairly similar to the level in 2020. So in total, this equates to about 4 million vapers in the population of Great Britain. So those were the key findings, and a bit of information on the methods adjustment. We're obviously going to have the Q&A at the end, but if you do want to get in touch with us at the ONS with any questions on the smoking data that we publish, you can get in touch with us on the email address shown in the slide. But I think that's all from me. I think I'm moving on quickly to the next speaker, so we have time for questions at the end. But yeah,
Fantastic.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, David. That was admirably clear. So hopefully people, if they've got questions, pop them in the chat and we will come back to them when we get to the Q&A session with everybody else. So I'm now going to invite Mark to share. I think Jelena is sharing your slides. I'm not sure, Mark, whether you're sharing them or Jelena is.
I'm sharing them because I've also been asked to go for a little.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. Okay, so you're going to talk us through some of the data and then show us a bit of the local profiles. Brilliant. So handing over to Mark Cook from OHID to take us through all of that.
Thank you. Yeah, so a bit of introduction. My name is Mark Cook. I'm a Principal Intelligence Analyst at OHID, and amongst other things, I'm Product Lead for the tobacco profiles, as well as the alcohol profiles and the wider determinants profiles within fingertips. So first, I'm going to go through what we updated in the profiles last week, based on the same APS source that David just spoke about, and very briefly go through what the data shows for the indicators we produce within OHID, and then, yeah, I've been asked to do a quick demo of how to find this data in profiles themselves. So these were the indicators updated in the profile last week. The main prevalence indicators for current smokers, ex-smokers, etc., as well as prevalence for the routine and occupational groups. So we publish all these indicators at local authority level, upper and lower, as well as region and other areas that are important. But importantly, this time, for the first time, we've produced the data at integrated care board level, which I think makes us one of the first fingertips profile to include those breakdowns. And as well, within fingertips, we also include breakdowns at income level by various inequality groups, such as ethnicity, age, stuff like that. So, key findings, I'll be very brief about the headline figures, as they're also published by ONS in the adult smoking habits, which David has just spoke about. All I would add, really, is the tobacco profiles is England only, and I think it's important that we now have a decade-long trend from the APS between 2011 and 2021. And while it's reduced significantly over that time, from around 20% to 13%, I think optimistically we may have hoped for a bigger reduction than that, looking forward to the smoke-free 2030 target. So the main purpose of the fingertips profiles is to provide local authority level data to show inequalities, allow areas to compare with their region, their neighbours, their statistical peers, and other areas of interest. So for this update, as usual, as I'm sure most people will be familiar with on this call, we see strong regional variation with the northeast and northwest at the top, and the southern regions tend to be at the bottom. and this tends to always be the case. Also in 2021, the LA variation is once again extremely wide, going from 28% to 3%. And at ICB level, the variation is not as wide, from 16 to 8%, but those are larger areas, so aggregation comes into account. The routine and manual group. So typically, as we all know, these are one of the key groups for smoking, and the 2020 figure has been revised now to 24.5%, and the odds ratio to 2.2. So this is the odds ratio between smoking prevalence in the routine and manual group and other occupational groups. And for 2020, the odds ratio has reduced after being more or less static for the last few years, which is positive. However, I should note that we don't know if that reduction between the routine and manual group and the other occupational groups is a temporary impact of the pandemic, because it hasn't been possible to calculate a figure for the occupational groups in 2021. And that's because of a data error at the survey source. And at the current time, I'm not sure whether that will be fixable, and so we're working on the likelihood that 2021 will be a gap in the routine and manual trends, and we'll probably have to wait for 2022 to see if the reduction between that inequality during the pandemic has been maintained. What's next for LTCP? So we're hoping to produce smoking-related mortalities and admissions in the new year. To calculate those, we needed the latest APS for it to be comparable for pooling, which we now have, and the ONS population estimates, and those are currently delayed because of the new census 2021 data. But they are due to be published at the end of this month, so we'll be looking at publishing them in the new year. At the earliest would be February, but it kind of depends on how our department plans the updates, and it has affected all mortality and admissions rates in the whole of cross fingertips, and the FOF profile will be prioritised. So my profiles, mainly smoking and alcohol for this, might be March, but we'll see. And then if I just show the actual data. So yeah, I've been asked to show how this data looks in fingertips and how to click through and find it fairly quick. So I'm sure you'll all be familiar with the front page of the tobacco profiles. It's just a bit of background, what was recently updated, and then a quick through of when we've recently updated different figures. There's also a change log down here, so you can see back in time easier when everything was updated. But if we click start, and I think why I've been asked to talk about this is it's all fingertips profiles have recently gone through a change in the presentation and appearance, so that now we only have 3 boxes at the top, where we used to have more. We used to have all the domains individually, and this change has been done, one, to make it more user friendly, but also to make it more user friendly for people who wish to look at this data on mobile devices and tablets and phones and such. So I'll just go through a quick run through about how it works. I'll go from right to left, which seems the wrong way around, but it's the easiest way to do it. So topic is fairly straightforward. So this update was mainly around prevalence. So if you choose the topic prevalence, you can see where the new APS figures have dropped in: current smokers, ex-smokers, and never smoked. The routine and manual stuff is under the priority populations under here, but we also include smoking, pregnancy, mental health, and smoking prevalence rates for substance misuse groups. But I'll click back to prevalence. And then geography. Now this has been simplified as well. So previously you'd click under geography and be given a list of a long list of different geography types. So it's currently set to England, whereas now you should just be able to click through and click at your desired geography level. So upper tier local authority here, and then the different geography versions are now in a different box here. So from April 2021 is the latest version, and the other versions are basically where local authorities have merged or split, or there's been changes. But that's how you select if you're interested in older geography breakdowns. Also on this screen, you can compare to your SIP for neighbours rather than your region. It's automatically set to compare to your region, I should have said. And these SIP for neighbours are basically your statistical pairs. So for around County Durham. So these this spine chart here is comparing to the nearest neighbour average rather than the regional average. And ICBs are now under there as well. Now the data view option, this is where most of the options are available. So I won't click on all these, but I'll click on the main ones. So if you click on trends, we're still on County Durham, it will show the trend for County Durham and RAG rated, whether it's a significant value high or below the England average, and the England average is always set there. But if you change benchmark option, you can change that to your regional average or nearest neighbours average as it is here. So if you click off that, it'll be all in the northeast region. So it's all good, and that's just your trend. And if you click trends for all in the northeast region, then you can see your trend that you're interested in compared to all those in your region, as well as, and again, if you click SIP for, it'll show all your statistical pairs. So these are the statistical pairs of County Durham. So you can see how your area is performing against others. That's pretty straightforward. Area profiles is a standard view, so it's just a spine chart. This will be the England average and the confidence interval range and weather. So for current smoking, you can see County Durham is significantly higher than the England average. And again, this will stay if you change to priority populations. It'll just show those indicators like that. If they're purple, it tends to mean the polarity is not that clear. So it might not be good or bad depending on the indicator to be higher or lower because of case finding and stuff like that. Compare indicators. So this is where you can compare one indicator to another. So at the moment, that's not a good example, but we've got smoking prevalence across the x-axis, and if we change the y-axis to mortality from lung cancer, if you click the regression line, then you can see that for every local authority in the country, as smoking increases, generally as we'd expect, mortality from lung cancer increases. You can also highlight your area. So County Durham is here. It's almost perfectly on the line. But you can also pick out certain areas. So Enfield here seems to have a high smoking rate but a low mortality rate compared to lung cancer, because it should be up here really. So that's what that view shows. I won't click on population because that's just a population pyramid for each local authority. Now, inequalities. So if you click on the inequalities, it'll give you the list of for every indicator, but there are more for APS than most of, like for instance, mortality indicators and admission indicators. So the first one is deprivation decile. So you can see smoking rate, as we'd expect, is higher in the most deprived decile compared to the least deprived decile. And this is the England average. And you can go back and see how this has changed over time. And we also have ethnic groups. So the white ethnicity is higher than England average, and the mixed, and the rest are lower. And yeah, all those are here. So country of birth is always quite striking because people that originate from Poland tend to have significantly the highest smoking rate. And again, you can see the age breakdowns as well. Data tails up over time, and you can see how that's changed all the way back to 2011. So that's a fairly interesting breakdown. Overview is the scarf chart. I think this used to be the standard option that Fingertips came up with, but again, it just shows each indicator for each area of the region, or SIP for pairs if you change this to SIP for pairs, and again, RAG rated for each indicator. So that's a good overview look. Compare areas. So this is like what I showed in the presentation for the regions, but it'll show your area here, County Durham, and where that figures compared to each region ranked. Red if it's statistically significantly higher than the England average, And if you click All England, then you can see them for all the local authorities in England, as well as ICBs and whatever geography you're interested in. But Hull and Blackpool areas tend to be at the top. Definitions. So yeah, basically this is just the metadata for each indicator in fingertips with a bit of background about the policy. The rationale includes a bit of the policy background, which people I know will be very familiar with, why smoking is important, but then a bit about the data, about how we calculate it, and importantly caveats and notes, and so changes to the APS and stuff like that in this case will all be detailed there. You can also do a map, a RAG-rated map, and you can change what you want to look at. So you can change it to quartiles, quintiles, just different ways of looking at the map. They're all automatically, where possible, every indicator in fingertips is set to RAG rated if it's appropriate. And again, if you click on the north, sorry.
I might just have to get you to, this is all so useful and interesting.
I've gone on too long.
I think we probably need to move on. But if people, because this, I mean, this, you've definitely shown me things that I didn't realise that the profiles had the functionality. If people want more support with what they can get out of the profiles, what's the best thing for them to do? To speak to local data?
Yeah, speak to LKIS.
Yeah,
LKIS contact is probably the best thing. Or if just quick contact us and we'll receive an email and we can set
fantastic. Brilliant. Cheers, Mark. I mean, I'm sure, and also lots of questions have come in while you've been talking, which is a relief because that means I won't have to sing at the end. So cheers for that, Mark. We'll come back to some of the questions that people have asked at the end. So Stephanie, over to you from NHS Digital to give us a run through on what we've got around our 11 to 15-year-olds. Thanks.
Hi there. Yes, so I'm Gebert from NHS Digital. I'm one of the analytical section heads and I'm the lead analyst on this publication in 2021. So if we pop on to the next slide, please. So this is a survey that takes place in secondary schools where we go out and measure, go and ask surveys to children in years 7 to 11. So they're mostly age 11 to 15. And since 2016, we've been running the survey every 2 years. It didn't go ahead in 2020 because of COVID pandemic and we just couldn't get into the schools, so it was delayed till 2021. The survey itself is undertaken by Ipsos Mori, so they recruit the schools and they go in and administer that questionnaire, compile all the data. Then the data comes into NHS Digital and we analyse it and produce the reports. So we took the survey between September 21 and February 22, and there's just a bit about there of how big it was. It was slightly smaller sample size than we hoped for. Again, it's just due to COVID, but it was still a reliable England level estimates. So if we go on to the next one, please. So this is our my summary slide that covers the entire content of the survey and all the different things we collect information on. But today I'm just going to be concentrating on the smoking cigarettes and vaping sections. So we've got a much longer timeline for cigarette smoking. It's been there since 1982. And we've got extra questions that were added on vaping since 2016. So we've got a smaller time series for that one. Let's go on to the next one. And I thought it was just worth reminding that for children, we have different definitions of smoking and what constitutes a regular occasional smokers. So in children, regular smokers are defined as having smoked at least 1 cigarette per week, whereas occasional smokers, it's less than that. And throughout the publication, we have a term called a current smoker where we combine those two together. It's usually just for our statistical purposes. We need a big enough sample size to get out the meaningful analyses and do all the things we want to do with the data. So if we go on to the next one, please. So the pupils who've ever smoked, so having smoked at least once in their lifetime, there's been a steady decline in that since 1996. And in 2021, 12% of pupils had ever smoked, and that's gone down quite significantly from 16% in 2018. And this just is a kind of a nice summary of all the kind of policies and interventions that have come along in the years to see are they having an impact and what do we see in terms of prevalence over time. For the next one. So when we look into that 12% of pupils who've ever smoked, the good news is we've only got 1% of children who are now in the 11 to 15 category who say they're regular smokers. 2% were ex-smokers, and 7% have tried it at least once. Girls continue to smoke, be more likely to smoke than boys, so 13% versus 10%. And as happens with this survey all the way through, the younger children are less likely to be smokers than the older ones, with 25% of 15-year-olds have tried smoking at least once. So now if we focus on those children who are regular smokers, so they smoked at least one cigarette in the last week, a third of those are saying they smoked at least 20 cigarettes that week, but that's come down from 45% in 2018. So it's going in the right direction, still quite a high number. On average, they're smoking 19 cigarettes. But again, that's still going down in the right direction. So for the survey this year, the 2021, we wanted to look at the impacts that the lockdown has had on behaviours and how much people are smoking. So we added some questions around how often have children met up with people outside of home and school. So as you can imagine, there will likely be an interaction between meeting up with people and availability to smoke. And we also asked questions around how they studied in the last academic year. So were they at home all the time? Did they study at home during lockdowns and went to school when they were open? Or did they go to school throughout most of the time or all of the time? So that really relates to those children for like key workers kids and things. And what we've found is, I think maybe predictable, but you do see where children took part in their education has got an impact on whether they were current smokers. So pupils who continued to go to school throughout the pandemic, 8% of them said they're current smokers, compared to 2% who studied at home during lockdown and most or all the time. And similar, pupils who are meeting up with their friends either outside of school and home every day, 9% of them are current smokers. That goes down to 3% of pupils who are meeting up with people once a week, and 1% for those who are current smokers who don't meet up with anyone else in the last week or never meet up with them. So moving on to the vaping question. So e-cigarette use has increased significantly in this survey. So between 2014 and 2018, the numbers of children reporting that they were current e-cigarette users was stable, but it has increased from 6% to 9% in 2021. We didn't have a pattern, a significant difference for the other ones. Pop on to the next slide. What we see is that this is being driven by, there's a difference between the genders. So girls are more likely to be currently using e-cigarettes, so 10% compared to 7%. But when we start to add in the impact of age, we see that actually older girls are much more likely to be driving this pattern that we're seeing. So 15-year-old girls, 21% of them are saying that they're current e-cigarette users, and that's jumped up from 10% in 2018. The pattern was different for boys. It's still increasing, but it wasn't quite so dramatic. There is a big impact on age. So it's just highlighted here, really. 1% of 11-year-olds are saying they're current e-cigarette users, but that jumps up to 18% in 15-year-olds. So this one's a bit of a slightly complicated looking chart, but what it's trying to do is unpick what's going on between children who are e-cigarette users and their cigarette smoking status. So we're looking to see who's actually using these e-cigarettes. And I think the kind of the take-home message here is we're only seeing that 1% of pupils who have never smoked are regular e-cigarette smokers, e-cigarette users. So we're not seeing huge numbers of e-cigarette users who've no impact on tobacco. There is definitely a correlation of what's going on. You're far more likely to be a e-cigarette user if you're also a regular normal cigarette smoker. And as with the cigarette smoking, there's a strong correlation between how often you're meeting up with other people and e-cigarette use. So even there are a small number of children, so 1% of them who are current e-cigarette users who haven't met up with people in the last 4 weeks, but 23%, if they're meeting up every day, are using e-cigarettes. And We also ask about the attitudes, so asking questions on, do you think it's okay for someone of your age to try an e-cigarette and to use e-cigarettes once a week? And what we're seeing here is positive attitudes to e-cigarettes increases with age, but though we're seeing an increase in the numbers of children who are vaping, the proportions of children who thought it was okay for someone of their age to use these e-cigarettes has fallen since 2018. So there's a slight mismatch there. So it's the attitudes have kind of got worse, but the actual prevalence is increasing. And then these are just some the information for people who are interested in it. So there's the link to the full publication. You can also access the code that we use to produce it. So if you really want to know how we've derived everything, go for it. It's up there. And then the data set's been lodged on the UK Data Service. So if you've got, you can apply for access to that as well.
Thanks, Steph. Lots of hand claps and so forth. We've also got some questions that have come in, so we'll pick those up at the end. So now I am going to attempt the feat of both chairing and talking, which will probably trip me up. So I'm just going to share my screen, if I can, and to talk you through some bits and bobs that we want to make sure you know about from ASH. And then, but before that, just to another source of data which I personally find very, very useful is the survey that's run by UCL, the Smoking Toolkit study. So this is on this Smoking in England website. I'll put it in the chat when I finish talking. And it has it's been a rolling survey since 2007. It has loads of really rich information about smoking behaviour, and it's updated every month, so you can kind of look at the trends over time. So these tabs here have the top line findings, and then you've got this sort of monthly tracking section, which has got even more detailed stuff, and then there's specific things on e-cigarettes. So I definitely commend that to you. It doesn't break down currently to anything other than England level, but I have been talking to UCL about whether there might be scope to do some regional stuff perhaps on an annual basis. So one to watch in the future. So hopefully you'll be able to see as I switch to the ASH website. So this is the ASH front page. I just want to show you where we're keeping some of this information that hopefully you'll be finding useful. Most of it's in our resources section, and most of the stuff I'm going to talk about are under the data and cost calculators. But we also have some local public opinion, which I'm also going to flag. So if you go into our data and cost calculator, we have the two tools I'm going to really show you are the ASH Ready Reckoner and our Economic and Health Inequalities dashboard in more detail. But I'd also recommend having a look at the ICS briefings if you haven't seen them already. So it's a briefing with data for each ICS. And then some of the other stuff we have in here is the analyses which underpin some of the data which are in our Ready Reckoner and our Economic and Health Inequalities dashboard. So hopefully that's all useful. The things I'm going to show you now are based on the 2019 APS data. We haven't had an opportunity yet to update the tools with the new smoking prevalence figures, but we will be in the new year, and we'll obviously circulate that when we do. And we'll also be looking at things, for example, around boundary changes. We've got some Northamptonshire has got some new local authorities, so we'll be updating it to reflect those things too. Right. Just to bring you into the ASH Ready Reckoner, Laura, my colleague, is going to explain to you more about how you download this. Unfortunately, it's not as user-friendly as it might be currently, and we hope to improve that in the future. You have to kind of download this spreadsheet and enable the macros. But as I couldn't really explain how to enable the macros, Laura's going to do that bit. But once you get in here, you have data available at England level and then down to regional and local authority level. So this is currently set for Hull, and it gives you a estimated cost for smoking in your local authority, and then how that breaks down is where these bars are. So a large bulk of the cost for every area is around lost productivity, followed by healthcare costs, social care costs, and then we also have a calculation around the cost of smoking related fires. on this grey bar down the side, you'll also see that we've got some other statistics. So we've got the overall kind of quantification for the number of smokers in your area, how much they are spending on tobacco, and that's also calculated to take into account the spend on illicit tobacco as well as the spend on legal tobacco. And we estimate that on average, smokers are spending around £2,000 a year on tobacco. Some of these figures are due to be updated with new analyses too. We don't quantify the costs related to collecting smoking related litter because it's quite locally specific in terms of how those costs are calculated, but you've got the volumes there, so you can have a look locally and potentially make some of your own calculations about what that might mean in terms of your own services. And then the data here, all the references are in a tab. Oops, on the Ready Retina, so you can go and explore the sources for all this data, and I won't go in, we haven't got time for me to go in and explain how all of these costs are calculated, but it's all there that, for you to look at. And for those of you that are in combined authorities, we've also done a breakdown on the combined authority geographies there on the other tab, and so you can pick your combined authority. So that is the Ready Reckoner. Hopefully relatively straightforward. Could people do the thing where they do like thumbs up or whatever? How many people have used the Ash Ready Reckoner? Just a kind of show of things. 2 of you? More of you? Hopefully more of that. Good. So I will just share my screen again and show you the oh, I shouldn't have stopped sharing. It's always dangerous, isn't it? Share screen. And just quickly show you the inequalities dashboard. So really similar in look and feel to the Ready Reckoner, but has some slightly different figures in it. So it doesn't focus on the costs to society as much as the impact on individuals. So it's currently set to England. So what should we do? Where should we go? Well, let's go to, we went to Kingston upon Hull. Let's go to Kingston upon Thames. So here we have the numbers of people experiencing poverty who smoke, and this is broken down here by working age adults, pensioners and children. We've got the number of people who are needing social care, different kinds of social care support. So funded residential care, domiciliary care, those with unmet social care needs, and the very large proportion of people who are receiving care, informal care from carers. Whoops, what have I managed to do there? Oh dear. There we go. And then we've got some other smoking related mortality. So some of this is derived from ASH data, and some of this is drawn from the tobacco profiles and kind of curated into this document. So some of this will be familiar from elsewhere. What we also have in this tool is a narrative, which you can set up and look at for your area, which gives you a sort of, you know, this is say the profile for London here, which gives a kind of narrative around some of this data and pulls in some stuff from the other section, which hopefully people will find useful. Again, we've done it for combined authorities, so you can go there and have a look at your combined authorities, and the references is at the end there too. The last thing I was just going to quickly flag is that we do have our public opinion data. This goes down to regional level. We don't have a big enough sample to go down to local authority level, and it gives you public support for a range of policy measures. We'll update this when we have new data in 2023. So I'm going to stop there and hand over to my colleague Laura, who's going to explain how to, first of all, how to make the most out of those by getting rid of those macros. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. And then quickly explain what we're going to be doing in terms of trying to develop some ward level breakdowns next year. So over to you, Laura. Are you sharing your slides, or are you just yelling there?
I am. Should be loading up now. Hi, so I'm Laura and I'm the Data and Insights lead at ASH. I just wanted to quickly explain to begin with how you actually run our Excel resources, because as Hazel said, you have to sort of deal with macros of it. So what I'm talking about is specifically this sort of warning banner that comes up. And all it means is that some of our Excel resources contain macros, which is a little bit of code that your computer might flag up as being potentially dangerous. All it is making some of the bits of the spreadsheets work. So you need to set it up so that it will to say that you trust the document. So to do that, Hazel's already gone through where things are. It's under resources. A lot of them are under data and cost calculators, particularly the more complicated dashboard type documents. I'll show you for Ready Reckoner, although there's a few of them that potentially this could come up for. It's download. Obviously, how a download looks will vary depending on what your browser is. Once you've downloaded the thing, you've got to unzip it first of all, because they're quite big, so they're zipped files. And save it in the folder that you want it to be saved in. At that point, you've got your document in the folder. So to allow macros to work, you've got to right click and then select properties in the list of options. And then it's on the first tab. It's not under the security tab, as you might think. It's under the first tab, general. The option at the bottom, I can't actually see what it says, too small, but it's that tick box that the arrow is pointed to in the bottom right. You've got to tick that to allow to say that you trust the document, and then it will run all the features. I think actually our dashboards mostly they mostly run even without the macros enabled, but in particular the table tab in the Ready Reckoner won't work properly. There's also sometimes you might get a banner across the top saying asking you if you want to make the document editable. You do, because even just selecting the buttons and the drop down things sort of counts to Excel as editing it, even though you're not really, just interacting with it. That's just how to get the documents up and running. So for a bit of a change of subject, so there's been quite a lot of demand, I think, for some ward level smoking prevalence data, which doesn't currently exist in that format. So we're trying to carry out some work to estimate what that might be. As more data is published from the 2021 census, we're hoping to refine those estimates. But to begin with, this is what our estimates are based on. So first of all, we've taken the ONS mid-year population estimates for local authorities and for the wards in them, to work out the percentage of each sex and age group combination in each ward relative to the local authority that they sit in. Then we were able to use the local authority smoking prevalence estimates alongside the national smoking prevalence estimates by sex and age group again to estimate an initial smoking prevalence for each ward. So essentially you look at the breakdown of sex and age in your ward and then generalize what those proportions would have looked like if that was what the national picture was made up of. Then obviously we understand that differences in deprivation between wards can have a big influence on the number of smokers in each local authority. So we took into account as well the indices of multiple deprivation. So to do that, we took the average of the lower layer super output areas, which is what LSOA is. And they're a really small geography. There's only about 1,500 people in each of them. And then they sort of cluster together, a group of them make up each ward. So we ranked the wards by their average LSOA index of multiple deprivation. And then in that ranking, split that into deciles. So the sort of 10th least deprived, and then, into tens, the 10th most, and so on until the 10th most deprived ward. Then a comparison was made for each ward between their decile calculated in that way and the decile of the local authority that they sit in, and then the estimates are adjusted in line with both. So that's currently how we work out the ward level estimates. There's some quite important and big limitations on these estimates. So first of all, as David has already kind of covered and explained, there was a discontinuity in the APS data that this would be based on. It has there's been a statistical correction done now, so it's less of a concern. But we will, but it's worth kind of bearing in mind that happened. And for the estimates, as the estimates wards will be based on local authority estimates, any fluctuations at local authority level have the potential to be actually magnified at ward level. So that's important to bear in mind. Then when we asked for feedback and comparisons from local surveys sort of done by local authorities to look at compare different wards, we found that the prevalence questions that were asked in those were generally a bit different from the APS. So we don't have any direct comparisons for our calculations. The feedback was mainly that the variation between wards was not as large as was expected. So the estimates have been revised a little bit to account for that. So we're hoping to add those estimates into the Ready Reckoner in the future, and there'll be a function to enter your own ward level estimates if you have them, and we'll prefer to use those than ours. And last up, we haven't been able to take into account other factors that are known to show variation in smoking, like ethnicity, but that is one of the possible next steps to include in the next iteration once the new ONS census data is published with that information.
Fantastic, thanks, Laura. We have a couple of minutes for questions, so if I can get Mark and Steph and David to turn their cameras back on. The first question, if you stop sharing your slides, Laura, as well, I wanted to ask, I think is for David, as quite a few people ticked this question, and it's an obvious one. How can we be sure that the exaggerated drop in smoking prevalence was not a consequence of behaviour change caused by the pandemic, for example, worried about COVID, less going out, rather than just a consequence of data collection methodology? The big one.
Yeah, luckily I saw this question come up in the chat, so I've been looking for an answer for this one. But yeah, just to sum up on this one, so what we did when we got the 2020 data, we looked at the Q1 2020 estimate for smoking prevalence and then compared that to the last 3 quarters of 2020 and basically get a drop in smoking prevalence from 13.8% to 12.3%, which is a very large drop. And we felt that that couldn't all be explained by the effect of the pandemic on people's smoking behaviour. And we consulted with our survey experts within ONS, who alerted us really to this research into how people report their smoking behaviour over the phone. So yeah, basically we felt, you know, obviously that drop would be a combination of the mode change and the effect of the pandemic on behaviour, and really our challenge in the adjustment methodology was to quantify the difference between those two, and that's what we've done in the adjustment basically. So we've adjusted for that discontinuity, and then the change between years in the adjusted figures will be due to factors such as, you know, the impact of the pandemic on people's attitudes. And we actually do reference a study from Italy that looks at the impact of the pandemic on smoking prevalence, and they actually found that it did have an impact and led to a fall in smoking prevalence, but actually that for established smokers there was an increase in their consumption, and that is in the article we published last week, which I can put a link in the chat to.
Yeah, that would be great, David. I think, you know, the truth is it's going to be enormously complex, and your estimate is as good as we, you know, were able to do within the constraints of having had an unexpected pandemic that disrupted the time series.
Yeah, exactly. It's our kind of best estimate of what would have happened if we didn't have the pandemic and the mode change.
Yeah.
And it's a lot better than we could have just said, you know, we've got a break in the time series, we're not going to do anything about it, we can't compare figures.
And just quickly, going forward,
yeah.
Will the methodology, you might have said this in your presentation, will the methodology go back to the way that it was before the pandemic, or are we sticking with the telephone from now onwards?
Yeah, I don't think we will ever go back to how it was done pre-pandemic. So yeah, I think we will need an adjustment to be made going forward, which I think we've set the foundation for in the method that we've developed this time around, but we're obviously open to developing the method further and making improvements if we can.
Well, no doubt.
So if anyone has got any views
that have
on
ideas will be getting in touch with you.
Yeah, definitely.
I think this there's a few questions around confidence intervals. I think I direct that to you, Mark, around, when we're breaking stuff down and there's some variation. Some places seem to have very narrow confidence intervals. Some places have got much wider confidence intervals. Could you talk a bit to that and how if there's scope to address that in the future? And then just I'll quickly come to you as well afterwards, Steph, because there's also lots of interest in being able to see that 11 to 15-year-old data in a more broken down way, and is that just down to sample size, and could that be addressed? So come to you quickly first, Mark.
Yeah, very quickly. The confidence intervals are due to different sample size basically in each local authority. So while these sample size is smaller, the confidence intervals are wider and there's more error. We estimate more error in the prevalence figure, and the main way that could be improved is to increase sample size, basically, of the APF.
Yeah, and so some people were saying, "Oh, my prevalence has gone up a great deal. Is that something I should be worried about?" I mean, to some extent, I suppose maybe, but there's also people need to look at the confidence intervals, have a sense of whether that changes within those confidence intervals, and maybe look to see if you have to have a look at a few data points, really.
Yeah, just exactly what you said, really. If the confidence intervals overlap, then we can't be certain that the change is not due to chance variation sampling method. So, yeah, if the confidence intervals still overlap, then I wouldn't be unduly concerned, and you should look back on your trend really to see general direction.
Cheers, Mark. So, Steph, quickly on the point about whether we might be able to get a sufficient sample size to break this down a bit. What's your view?
So there might be good news on that one. So the next survey is 2023, and at that point we're looking to move the survey online. And if that's a success, then that does give us the option to potentially allow a bigger range of schools to take part each year. I can't confirm it will happen, but yeah, getting off paper and that is costly to run, going into schools and actually doing it. So we are looking for future improvements. It's certainly not going to be the next survey. It's going to be a big change, but
so next survey is 2023. So the survey after that would be 2025. So we'd be looking at 2020 data published in 2026, maybe.
Potentially, I don't know, but we are trying our best to get a bigger sample size, and particularly for smoking, because the numbers of regular smokers is so small that there is a limit to how much we can break it down. 1% of 9,000 kids. I mean, it's good that it's 1%, but
yeah, and one has to hope that will continue up to 2025. I do hope. Thank you so much, everybody. We've really packed loads in. What a festive bag of goodies. I will wish you all a Merry Christmas. I shall not sing, and see you all in the new year, where we will be circulating updates to our Ready Reckoner, to our dashboard, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of those ward level estimates out soon. And Cecilia's on that's wonderful. To see you here, Cecilia, and see you all in 2023. Thanks very much.